There are nearly 40,000 pubs in Britain today. In the year 2000, there were 52,000. That means 12,000 pubs have closed in just 25 years. And today, 2 more close their doors forever, every single day. But the story of the pub does not begin with decline. It begins with Roman soldiers drinking wine in the mud of a new province, a medieval king who forced every alehouse to hang a sign, a gin craze that killed more people than the plague, and a Victorian building boom that turned a simple drink stop into the most loved institution in British life. In the year 43, the Roman army invaded Britain. Along every new road, soldiers built tavernae, small wine shops that also worked as inns for tired travelers. The word taberna is where we get the word taverna, tavern. At the Roman town of Wroxeter, archaeologists found the remains of a large taberna with mosaic floors and a central courtyard. It was, essentially, an upscale pub built 1,800 years ago. When the Romans left in the year 410, their taverns were abandoned, but the idea never disappeared. In Anglo-Saxon England, ale became something far more important than a treat. Water was often unsafe to drink, full of sewage and bacteria, but ale was boiled during brewing, which made it safer than water itself. Everyone drank ale, men, women, children, monks, even kings. A single monk might drink 4 or 5 pints a day, and monasteries brewed some of the finest ale in the land. The first pubs were not businesses at all. They were simply homes. Women called alewives brewed ale in their own kitchens and sold it through the window. When a pole or leafy branch hung outside a house, it meant one thing: ale sold here. By the Norman period, 3 distinct types of drinking house existed, each one legally different. The alehouse sold cheap ale to working people. The tavern sold imported French wine to a richer crowd. The inn offered food, drink, and a bed for the night, and only the inn was allowed to do all 3. In 1552, England passed its first nationwide licensing law, requiring every alehouse keeper to be approved by a local magistrate before opening. That single law from 1552 is still the legal foundation of pub licensing in Britain today. Around the year 1200, hops arrived in England from Flanders, and brewers discovered that hopped beer lasted far longer than plain ale and had a sharper, more bitter taste. Traditionalists resisted for generations, insisting that real English drink had no hops at all. In 1393, King Richard II issued a strange new law. Every alehouse in England had to display a sign outside its door. Most people assumed this was for customers, but the real reason was far less romantic. A royal inspector called the ale taster needed an easy way to identify which houses to check for bad, watered-down beer. That royal inspection law is the true origin of the most famous tradition of the British pub, the hanging sign outside every door. It began as government regulation, not decoration. By the 1400s, alehouses had names like the King's Head, the Red Lion, and the Bell, references to monarchy, heraldry, and the church. The Red Lion remains the most common pub name in Britain to this day. One pub in Nottingham claims to be the oldest in all of England, with a founding date of 793 carved above its door. But historians have found no record of that pub's name before 1799, nearly 1,000 years later, and the building itself dates only from the 1600s. The claim is a beloved legend, not a historical fact. Not every pub name comes from kings or saints. One famous London pub is called the Elephant and Castle, a name that sounds playful, but actually comes from a mispronunciation of Infanta de Castilla, a Spanish princess once connected to the English royal family by marriage. In the 1650s, a new rival appeared. Coffee houses opened across London and Oxford, charging 1 penny at the door, earning the nickname penny universities because for that single coin, any man could sit for hours, read a newspaper, and debate politics with strangers. Unlike the rowdy alehouse, coffee houses banned gambling, swearing, and drunkenness. Coffee became respectable, ale became rough. For the first time, London's drinking culture split along class lines. One of those coffee houses belonged to a man named Edward Lloyd. Ship owners gathered there to insure their cargo against storms and pirates, and that small coffee house eventually grew into Lloyd's of London, one of the most powerful insurance markets in the world. In 1689, the government made a decision that would nearly destroy London. To reduce imports of French brandy and use up surplus English grain, gin production was thrown open to anyone. No license was required to sell it. Gin became cheaper than beer, cheaper than bread, cheaper than almost anything. By 1740, London had 15,000 gin shops for a population of only 650,000 people. Some streets sold gin from one house in every 5. Signs outside gin shops advertised, quote, "Drunk for a penny, dead drunk for 2pence, clean straw for nothing," promising a bed of straw to sleep off the effects for free. Gin earned a grim nickname, Mother's Ruin, because women could buy it just as easily and just as cheaply as men. Between 1730 and 1749, the death rate in London actually exceeded the birth rate. A magistrate of the time wrote that gin was, quote, "the principal sustenance of more than 100,000 people in the city." In 1742, an artist created an engraving called Gin Lane, showing a starving mother so drunk that she drops her own baby down a staircase. Its companion piece, Beer Street, showed happy, healthy, well-fed beer drinkers. What most people never learn is that the artist was secretly paid by beer brewers, making Gin Lane one of history's first advertising campaigns disguised as art. The historical numbers tell a striking story. Gin killed more people in 1740s London than the Great Plague did in 1665. No one calls it a plague because this crisis was entirely self-inflicted. The government's first attempt to fix the crisis, a heavy annual license fee in 1736, failed completely. Furious rioting broke out. Gin kept selling illegally on every corner, and the law was repealed within 7 years. A second law in 1751 worked where the first had failed. It forced distillers to sell only to licensed retailers and let magistrates limit how many gin shops could open in one area. Within a single year, gin consumption fell by half. By 1830, the government tried a completely different strategy to fight cheap gin, make beer even easier to sell. The Beer House Act let anyone open a beer house for a one-time fee of 2 guineas, no magistrate approval needed at all. The effect was explosive. 45,000 new beer houses opened in the very first year, and Britain soon had roughly 100,000 of them. It was a classic case of good intentions, creating an entirely new problem: unregulated houses with no oversight at all. The following decades became the Victorian golden age of the pub. Breweries grew rich and powerful, buying up pubs and forcing them to sell only that brewery's own beer, a system known as the tied house. Pub interiors became ornate palaces of etched glass, dark mahogany, and polished brass, so grand that a working-class customer could feel rich for a single evening. But those same pubs were physically divided by class, bare floors, and cheap beer in the public bar. carpets, and upholstered seats in the saloon bar. Some pubs even installed frosted glass panels called snob screens, allowing wealthier drinkers to order their beer without ever being seen by the working-class customers standing just a few feet away. Victorian pubs also kept a slate board behind the bar called a tick list, recording every regular customer's unpaid debt. Tradition demanded that a debt was never erased, only ever paid off in full, a mark of trust between the landlord and the local community. Many pubs also had a small side window called the off-sales hatch, where a customer, often a woman, could buy a jug of beer to take home without ever stepping inside the pub itself, a space still considered improper for respectable ladies to enter. By the 1890s, the pub had become the true center of the community, hosting meetings, concerts, funerals, and weddings. The word pub itself is simply short for public house, and this shortened form was first written down sometime in the 1800s. The temperance movement fought back hard in the new century. In 1908, children under 14 were banned from pubs entirely. Then, in 1915, wartime factories were losing production because workers turned up drunk during shifts making munitions. An emergency law restricted every pub in the country to strict opening hours, roughly noon to 2:30, then 6:30 to 9:30. Those restricted hours, the familiar rhythm of the pub lunch and the evening session, feel like centuries of tradition, but they were actually created by a single wartime emergency law and stayed in place for 90 years, until 2005. During the Second World War, a British wartime leader famously insisted that pubs remain open through the bombing of the Blitz, arguing that morale itself depended on ordinary people keeping their small daily freedoms. Pub cellars across British cities doubled as bomb shelters, and on the night of June 6, 1944, the eve of D-Day, pubs near military bases were packed with soldiers sharing one final drink before deployment. After the war, the pub slowly began to lose its grip on daily life. Television kept people at home in the evenings. Rising car ownership let people drive to supermarkets instead of walking to their local, and cheap beer sold for home consumption drained customers away. In the 1960s, breweries introduced keg beer, pasteurized, carbonated, and easy to serve, but critics said it tasted bland and artificial compared to traditional cask-conditioned ale, which was slowly disappearing from British pubs. In 1971, 4 young men in their 20s, journalists and students, not brewery owners, founded a small protest group in Manchester called the Campaign for Real Ale. Their entire goal was to save traditional cask ale from extinction. What started as 4 friends grumbling about bland beer grew to over 30,000 members within just 4 years, and Real Ale survived because of them. That same decade, small pubs became unlikely music venues. Pub rock bands played tiny stages across London, and that raw, stripped-down scene helped give birth to punk rock. Before the 1970s, most pubs served nothing but crisps and pickled eggs, and pub food as we know it today did not yet exist. In 1991, a London pub called the Eagle began serving genuinely restaurant-quality food alongside pints of beer, and journalists coined a brand new word to describe it: gastropub. By 1996, that word had entered the official dictionary. Then came 2 massive shocks in a single decade. In March 2007, indoor smoking was banned in every public place in England, and pub culture changed overnight as smokers stepped outside into the rain to share a cigarette in what became known as the Smoker's Corner. The following year, the 2008 financial crisis pushed beer prices up and disposable income down, and pub closures accelerated to roughly 29 every single week by 2010. The campaign for Real Al kept fighting, this time for lower taxes on beer, and communities themselves started registering their local pub as an official asset of community value, a legal status that gives locals the first chance to buy their pub before it is lost forever. In 2014, a new law called the Pubs Code was introduced to protect independent landlords from being exploited by the very breweries that owned their buildings, finally giving tenants the right to request a fair market rent instead of a one-sided tied deal. In some villages, when the last pub was about to close forever, the local residents pooled their own savings, bought the building together, and now run it as a community-owned pub, keeping the doors open for the whole village. Then came 2020 and the COVID